Hello and welcome to Enroll. So in this class, we will deal with the rural indebtedness. Okay, the same fifth unit, agricultural sector. What is the meaning of rural indebtedness and what are all the various causes and the remedial measures for rural indebtedness? Now, first of all, what is the meaning? There is a difference between being in debt. So if you say being in debt, so that means what you are owing money to someone. I mean, that is for the time being. So you borrowed money from someone. So you owe that money till you repay it. You are in debt. But the same thing, being in indebtedness. So the difference is perpetually or permanently being in debt. Okay. So if a person is unable to repay the loan permanently, if he is in debt, that is what we call it as indebtedness. So rural indebtedness. So we know that majority of the people in our country, nearly 70% of the population in the country, they live in the rural areas. We have seen that, isn't it? And most of these rural people, they borrow mostly for unproductive purpose. I mean, they borrow both for productive purpose as well as for unproductive purpose. But the proportion of borrowings for unproductive purpose is becoming more than the proportion of the borrowings that is going for the productive purpose. So they mostly borrow for unproductive purpose. And since they are borrowing for unproductive purpose, to whom they have to go? They cannot get that loan from the from the institutional sources, isn't it? So if they have to borrow loans for unproductive purpose, like for the consumption purpose, then they have to approach only the money lenders. And these money lenders, they charge a very high rate of interest, and the rural people, they will not be able to repay the loan. So throughout their lifetime, perpetually or for a long period of time, they are continuously being in debt. So that is the situation, rural indebtedness. Okay. Now, what are all the various causes for rural indebtedness in our country? So causes of rural indebtedness. So the first cause, I mean, it can be both for productive purpose as well as for unproductive purpose. So what are all the various causes of rural indebtedness? The first one, poverty. So the first cause of rural indebtedness, people are borrowing money for basic survival purpose, for basic consumption purpose, because they are poor. So that is the first cause, is poverty. Since they are poor, they are having low level of savings. Where will they save? They don't have money even for basic consumption purpose. And the frequent crop failures, because they are depending on climatic conditions. Because of the crop failures, they are not able to get the sufficient amount of produce, cultivate sufficient amount of produce, and they are not able to get the sufficient amount of income from their piece of land. So the low poverty, and they are unable to save anything, so they keep borrowing. So the first and foremost reason is poverty. And the second reason is borrowed funds for making improvements on land. So this can be your productive purpose. So this anyway, it is better than the first one. So this basically it is a productive purpose. They're borrowing loans for productive purpose. But still borrowing is a borrowing. But only thing is, it is better, since if it is for productive purpose, once the cultivation is over, if they are making any improvements in the land, and if they are getting the better produce, better cultivation, they are going to get the better money income. They will be able to repay the loan unless or otherwise if there is a abrupt change in the climatic conditions. Okay. Then the third reason they are borrowing is borrowed funds for unproductive activities or purposes. So if they are borrowing for, I mean, that's again because they are poor, even for their basic consumption purpose also they have to borrow. And in the rural area, all those festivals and all, they are considered as a prestige. So even with borrowing also, they have to perform all those rituals. So that's why most of the proportion of their borrowed funds goes for unproductive purposes than for productive purposes. And another major uh, reason is there is something called as the debt inheritance of the parents. This is what we something we call it as ancestral debt. So the previous generation, parents or grandparents, so they were not be able. I mean, they for some reason or the other, they were in debt. In debt, they were not able to repay the loans which they have borrowed. So the current generation, they are along with their property, they are inheriting the debt also. Okay, so because they are not having any property, the ancestors, so they are passing it on only the debts to their heirs, to their children. So there is a quotation given by All India Rural Credit Survey Committee. All India Rural Credit Survey Committee. So the quotation is, an Indian farmer is born in debt, lives in debt, dies in debt, and passes on his debt to his heirs. So this summarizes the entire, whatever you call it as, the rural indebtedness in our country. So the amount borrowed might be very, very less. But since, I mean, the ancestors, the parents or the grandparents or whoever, whatever they might have borrowed must have been a very little amount. But then, since they were not able to repay the loan, along with the interest rate, the amount becomes huge for the current generation to repay, which they also won't be able to repay. So again, the debt keeps on passing generation after generation. Okay, that is the another major reason for rural indebtedness in our country. And the next one, mostly they are depending upon the dependence on non-institutional sources. So since, again, the same reason, as the major proportion of their borrowed funds is for unproductive purposes, they have to depend only on the non-institutional sources who charge a very high rate of interest. Okay, then the next reason is inadequate support price for crops. So the support prices for the crops is supposed to be provided by the government. So the government purchases the crops from the farmers through the government as its own agency, mostly the Food Corporation of India, the purchase and the procures the products from the farmers, and they distribute through ration shops and to the super retail shops in the urban area. So when the Food Corporation of India is purchasing the products from the farmers, they have to, I mean, they have to pay some price, isn't it? That price should be reasonably high enough or reasonable enough to support the farmers and his family. But then that is becoming inadequate. Whatever the price that is being paid by the Food Corporation of India to the farmers is inadequate. It is not supporting the family. It is very, very low. So the farmers are not able to get sufficient amount of income for their produce. And along with another reason, along with the general rise in the price, increase in the trends of prices in the country, there is also simultaneous increase in the cost of cultivation. So all the agricultural inputs cost keeps on increasing. So the cost of cultivation keeps on increasing for the farmers. So they have to keep on borrowing again and again. So whatever might be the reason or all these reasons, finally the farmers are continuously or perpetually being in debt. Okay. So these are all the causes of rural indebtedness in the country. And it has been said that more than half the percentage of the population in our country are being in permanently being in debt. Okay, so each and every government, they are trying to rectify this problem faced by the farmers. So we have known that so many farmers have been committing suicides and all some of the places and all, isn't it? So almost all the governments, the central government as well as most of the state governments or every government is trying to rectify these problems. Okay, so some of the remedial measures suggested as well as taken by the government. So suggested or adopted by the government to rectify this problem. So the first one is to enact, there is something called as, the government has to enact some laws, that is appropriate legislations, that is rules, laws should be enacted by the governments, legislations to scale down, that is to bring down the old debts, that is the ancestral debts of small farmers. So now what happens if the loan which is borrowed, which is if it is not repaid on time, the rate of interest keeps on increasing. And so most this ancestral debt, it was borrowed by the previous generation. So since they were not able to repay, sometimes the rate of interest happens to be more than the principal amount that have been borrowed by the parents or the grandparents, which it was not possible for the current small farm generation after generation. They are only being a small farmer. So which the current generation, they were not able to repay the loan. So some rules and regulations should be implemented in such a way to scale down, that is bring down the ancestral debt. So either you waive the interest rate or waive the some amount, some this interest rate should not be cumulative. So something should be done to bring down the rate of interest, to bring down the amount that has to be paid by the current generation. To that effect, the government has to pass certain legal laws or rules or regulations in the country, so that the current generation will not have the burden of paying the entire amount, principal amount, as well as the rate of interest which has been cumulatively added. So it is becoming a very big burden for the small farmers. So some rules have to be enacted by the government to bring down the amount that has to be paid by the current generation, which has been borrowed by the previous generation. So that is the first measure. And then the second one, the most important one, to increase the network of cooperatives, to increase the network of cooperatives. So we have seen, isn't it? These are all the institutional sources of credit. Cooperatives, commercial banks, and RRBs. So what is the reason? They are the institutional sources of credit. So if these sources of credit are increasing, network of all these institutional sources of credits are increasing, automatically the rural people will not depend upon the money lenders who charge a high rate of interest. To reduce the dependence of the rural people on money lenders. So that is the, so they will be depending on the institutional sources. If there are more number of branches, more number of banks are there for to lend the uh, loans to the rural people. So they won't go to the money lenders who charge high rate of interest. Okay. Then to provide, the next measure suggested to provide timely and adequate credit to all those, to small marginal farmers. This is the microfinance. This is the reason the microfinance scheme has been adopted in the country. So marginal farmers and rural artisans, because these people need the very small amount of credit, which earlier all these commercial banks and other institutional sources, they were reluctant to lend. So now if this is provided by the commercial banks and the institutional source of credit itself, then they won't again go to the money lenders further. So it should be timely at the appropriate time, at the time required by the small farmers, and the adequate credit. Okay, whatever the requirement amount required, that has to be provided by the institutional sources of credit. Okay, and then the next measure suggested to give due importance, to give due importance to rural poor under priority sector lending by banks. So since most of the financial institutions in the country, they were not lending to rural people, and they were not lending mainly to the agricultural sector, since they are preferring only to lend money for the service sector or for the industrial sector. The Reserve Bank of India, on the advice of the government, uh, categorized certain areas, certain sectors of the country under priority sector. So the first one under that is the agricultural sector. So the name itself says priority means the important sectors. So the first one was the agricultural sector, and next is the small scale industries and the cottage industries, and any other sector which are not able to uh, get the proper loans, proper credit from the financial institutions existing in the country. And so the Reserve Bank of India categorized these sectors as the priority sector. So once they have been after categorizing these sectors as the priority sectors, all the banks have been instructed that out of the total lending operations, of the total amount lent by the commercial banks, nearly 40% must go to the priority sector. The remaining 60% only they can lend for any other purpose, personal or for industries or for trade or for any other purpose according to their wish. So minimum 40%, it is a must that 40% of the total lending should go to the priority sector. The first preference should be given to the priority sector. And which are all the priority sector? The first one is the agricultural sector. The second importance is the small scale and cottage industries. And any other area, any other important economic activity, small ones, but unable to get the proper financial assistance. So those areas are categorized as the priority sector, and all the banks, especially the commercial banks and all, out of the total lending operations, 40% should be directed towards the priority sector. So that's the to give due importance to rural poor under priority sector lending by them. So that's something the government has adopted it. Okay. So that's why we have seen, isn't it, the source of the commercial banks credit increased to the extent from 0.7% in the beginning, that is in 1951-52. It has increased to nearly 70%. That is because the commercial banks have been advised to lend loans to the agricultural sector, because agricultural has been categorized under priority sector. Okay. Then the next measure, consumption loans should be provided by So consumption loans should be provided by the public sector bank, public sector commercial banks to the weaker sections. So what is this consumption loans? So consumption loans come under the category of unproductive loans. So we have seen, isn't it? Uh, they are depending on money lenders mainly because the money lenders lend loans for unproductive purpose. That is the consumption loan. So if the commercial banks also start lending loans to the rural people, even for unproductive purpose, that is for consumption purpose, then they will not depend upon the money lenders. That's why it should be that also should be provided by the public sector commercial banks. Okay, and then the next one is the mortgaging of the lands. Mortgaging the lands to money lenders must be avoided. So why the farmers, how the money lenders are grabbing the lands of the farmers? Because whenever they are borrowing loans from the money lenders, they don't have any security to provide. So whatever the land on which they are cultivating, the same land they are keeping it in the form of security as a collateral. So rural indebtedness, they are not able to repay the loan for forever. So finally, they are losing the lands to the money lender. The money lenders are able to grab the land. So that's why the policy is whatever it is, the farmer should not be keeping their land as security against the borrowings. So if they are not doing then the money lenders will not be able to grab the lands from the farmers. So mortgaging the lands of the money lenders should be avoided. Okay, and the next one, rebate for one-time settlement of dues may be enhanced. Enhanced means increased. Rebate for one-time settlement. What is the meaning of rebate? Rebate means discount. So if anybody is willing to pay the entire dues, one-time settlement at one time, then the the percentage of discount should be increased. Okay, since the person is settling the entire amount in one time, so the discount should be increased. Okay, so people will be encouraged to settle the loan amount. And the next one, coverage of women farmers. I can highlight this, coverage of women farmers under microfinance methodology should be increased. This we have seen, isn't it? That SHG microfinance scheme. So that more and more women, more and more SHG group should be covered. Okay, that is the methodology should be increased. So these were all the some of the suggestions given for the to rectify the problem of rural indebtedness in the country. Okay, so there are some of the measures adopted by some of the state governments as well as the government of India. So, like, let's say, what are the steps taken? So, the steps taken by government. So, for most of the governments, they were announcing the loan waiver scheme. So you must have seen when they are contesting for elections, if this party comes to power, we will waive all the loans of the farmers. So this is a very common populist measure announced by most of the government. So basically it is, they need not have to pay the, especially the ancestral debt and all. So loan waiver scheme. Okay. Then as far as the Telangana government is concerned, so they are announced a scheme, the Raitu Bandhu scheme. So the Telangana government announced a scheme known as the Raitu Bandhu. So under this scheme, uh, Raitu Bandhu, sorry. So under this scheme, all landowners are given rupees 10,000. Highlight it again. All landowners are given rupees 10,000 per acre per year in 2 installments. Earlier it was 8,000. Now it has been increased to 10,000 in 2 installments. This is, this is for, as a income support to the farmers. And going by the same line, the union government, the government of India. So the union government of India, they have also started a scheme. There's something called as the Pradhan Mantri Kisan Saman Nidhi. It is PM Kisan. So under this scheme, providing to farmer and his, farmer and his families rupees 6,000. The Telangana government is providing under Raitu Bandhu scheme 10,000 rupees per acre per year. But the union government, under PM Kisan scheme, they are providing rupees 6,000 per year per acre in 3 installments. As a, this is the minimum income support scheme to the farmer and his family. Minimum income support to the farmer and his families. Okay. But in spite of everything, still the rural indebtedness persists in our country. So it has been estimated that nearly 93.09 million agricultural households are there in our country. Out of that, more than half the percentage of the agricultural households, they are permanently in debt. And approximately the average average amount of money owed is like around 74,121 per household. So it was somewhere around 931 crores or something, but now it is around 74th average debt per household happens to be 74,121. This is as of 2019. Okay. So in spite of all these measures, still the rural indebtedness persists in the country. But of course, compared to what it was earlier, at least the government has been taking the steps to reduce the rural indebtedness in the country. But this is one of the very, very serious problems faced by the farmers. Okay. So these are all the causes and measures for rural indebtedness and the steps taken by the government. Okay. So we are finished with the, as far as the agricultural topic is concerned, starting with the causes of low importance of agriculture. We are finished with the causes for low productivity in agriculture, and what are all the reforms undertaken by the government. Institutional reforms, that is land reforms and the green revolution, and the most important problem, agricultural credit. And so all this up to rural indebtedness, what are all the measures taken by the government to solve the problems of agricultural finance to the in the rural areas. Okay. So the next area, so we finished with the agricultural credit from the modern technological cultivation, and we have finished the problems of agricultural finance. The next problem faced by the farmers is how they are selling the commodities in the market. See, till they sell the commodity in the market and they get the fair price for their produce, the problem of the agricultural farmers will not stop, will not end. So the next problem faced by the farmers is in marketing their produce. So that is the agricultural marketing in India, which I will take it in my next class. Okay. So if you find this video useful, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you have any doubts, please mention it in the comment box. Okay. So until my next class, take care. Bye bye.